Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I think we have participants from probably all over the country to this webinar. This is the Cannaployment Unions Are Knocking, What Do We Do? Managing the Presence of Labor Unions in the Cannabis Industry webinar. So welcome to you all. We have a great panel here today. I'm really excited to get into a question and answer session. I think this is really a timely discussion with what's going on in the country these days with unions, and particularly the writer strike and UAW strike. And I believe today even our president is on the picket lines with the UAW. So, and I know that the title is "The Unions Are Knocking," but actually I think the unions are in our industry already, particularly with a 2-week strike that occurred back in April with Green Thumb Industries. There are other unions indicating that they have tens of thousands of members. So I think the unions are actually in the door, but maybe not in completely in our industry. This webinar is intended to be really agnostic. I know everybody has an opinion about unions, but we want to be agnostic as it relates to unions, and really have a discussion about how we create a fair employment environment in the cannabis industry.
The content presented here is intended to share thoughts and opinions to foster constructive discussion. The views expressed by hosts and guests on this webinar are not necessarily the views of Zuber, Lawler, or any other company with which the hosts and guests are associated. Nothing contained on this webinar is intended to encourage the use of illegal substances. This webinar represents only the opinions of the hosts and their guests and should not be taken as medical or legal advice. Listening, reading, corresponding, or interacting on social media with our content does not establish a doctor, patient, or legal relationship. Please consult your healthcare provider and business professionals for any questions concerning cannabis, medicine, law, or accounting.
So with that being said, let's introduce our panel. We have Beatrice Runyon, who is the Associate VP of Client Development. Beatrice, if you want to tell a little bit about yourself, then we'll move on to the next panelist.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Again, my name is Beatrice Runyon. I'm the AVP for Greenleaf-HR. And Greenleaf-HR, we are a leading cannabis HR management company headquartered in California. And we've been helping HR professionals simplify human resource management for all our clients. So we'd love to be a resource for you all.
Fantastic. We also have Jason DeSense, who's the managing partner at Flower Hire. Jason, if you could please tell a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So Jason DeSense here. I work for Flower Hire. We are the #1 cannabis recruitment and HR advisory firm. Our firm specializes obviously in recruitment. However, we also have an HR advisory firm that does everything from working with startups to MSOs to publicly traded companies, where we can help from things like handbook, compensation plans, org charts, etc. And we work all across the country.
Fantastic. And our final panelist is Michael Carlin, who is from my law firm, Zuber, Lawler. Michael, if you want to tell a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for the introduction, Jim. My name is Mike Carlin. I am an attorney at Zuber Lawler. Zuber Lawler is a law firm that handles all aspects of cannabis law, from employment to deals, transactions, regulatory guidance. I specifically handle labor employment law. I've been practicing in California for the last 10 years, and I handle cases for management involving claims of discrimination, harassment, retaliation. I also conduct EEO internal investigations and handle EEOC complaints for management. So that's a little bit about my practice. Thanks.
Fantastic. And I too am an attorney in the litigation practice group and also the cannabis practice group at Zuber Lawler. And I know enough probably about unions and employment to be dangerous. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot today from you all. So with all the introductions being said, also I got to mention that there will be a poll question here coming up, should be for all of our participants to answer. So please answer that question if you can. Fantastic. All right, first question. So, and this one is for you, Jason. How can cannabis companies effectively foster employee engagement to enhance overall productivity and job satisfaction? I think you're on mute.
I'm here. There we go. Yeah. Terrible. Thanks. Yeah, that's a pretty common question we get, as well as it's an age-old problem in not just the cannabis industry. Keeping your employees engaged, but more importantly, enabling them to be successful in their jobs is really what's really important. The top three things whenever you do an engagement survey that tends to come out as the top issues. One is compensation, two is leadership communication, followed by career development of the individual. So as you break that down, compensation basically just means, do people feel like the work that they do, are they're fairly paid for that work? That tends to be, I will say a lot of folks tend to always say, I'm not paid enough. That is somewhat true. But at the end of the day, if the point there is companies need to really spend the time to create a compensation plan that complements the work that will not only retain your current employees, but would entice others to come over. Leadership communication is super important, right? That's where cultures are made, quite frankly, is when leaders interact with all levels of the employee base, but more importantly, they actually have real conversations and dialogue, right? Not just a waterfall one way. So it's really important that leaders communicate often. There's various different ways to do that, either through a town hall or, it's simply just walking around. When I spent over 20 years in automotive, we would see the plant manager or this, C-suite come in, and they would walk around. They would talk to their employees. Career development, finally, number three, that is a huge, important factor companies tend to forget. Everyone says typically they have career development. To some degree, yes. However, if you actually have a more of a formalized process that actually can guide someone to say, here's your current role, here are the other roles, both laterally and up, that eventually you can attain based on experience and or projects you might work on. So as you think about engagement, more importantly, to keep your current employees engaged, also have the proper enablement capabilities. What does that mean? That means, do they have the right work tools to do their job? If you can't do your job with the right tools, therefore it's going to, affect your productivity. So it's not just engagement, it's also enablement. So as companies think about those top three things in engagement: compensation, leadership development, and career development, followed by making sure your employees are enabled to do their job the best they can with the training that they hopefully have.
Fantastic. Next question is for you, Beatrice. How can organizations effectively address concerns related to workplace safety, health, and wellness, which are significant priorities in the cannabis industry? I know that historically, workplace safety is really one of the main reasons unions developed. So I think this is an important question.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really important that companies look at really a comprehensive approach. It's not just a one size fits all and one or two things that they need to look at. They need to look at really a whole, laundry list, if you want to call it, of different things that they can look at. One thing is regulatory compliance. You want to make sure that you are staying up to date with any either local or national regulations that are related to the cannabis industry, any type of workplace safety. And make sure that your organization is complying with all of those laws. You also want to do a risk assessment and go through your organization and see where are there areas that might be potential hazards. It can be something as simple, as a trip hazard. If you've got a cord laying somewhere or something that somebody could trip over. You can also some things more serious, things that exposure to chemicals, fires, even ergonomic issues. You should also have these safety policies in writing that should cover everything from how, cannabis handling to storage to emergency response plans, and make sure that your employees are aware of these policies and make sure that they're trained. You want to have ongoing safety training and communication with your employees, as well as the use of personal protective equipment or PPE. And you want to make sure that you supply your employees with any necessary PPE, gloves, masks, goggles, lab coats, anything that is relevant to their job that they need to do their job to keep them safe while they're doing their work. Also have, an emergency response plan. How do you handle if a fire breaks out, if there's some sort of a medical incident, and conducting regular drills to know what to do in those situations so employees are prepared and they're not panicked. They can calmly assess the situation and act accordingly. And also promote the health and wellness programs within your organization, whether it's physical fitness, mental health awareness, and support stress management, all of those things. Maybe consider offering an employee assistance program so that you can address employee well-being. Looking at ergonomic roles, especially if there's roles that are repetitive tasks. A lot of the roles are doing a lot of repetitive tasks. Assess those to see if there's things that there can be done to make sure they're doing it ergonomically as possible, and see if there's anything that we can do to reduce those musculoskeletal, I can't say that word, injuries. Making sure that there's a clear process for reporting any issues. So if someone notices that there is a potential safety hazard or even just a concern, or if there is an incident that takes place, making sure that there's clear information on how to report any of those issues. And then continuously monitor all of these things to make sure nothing has changed, nothing needs to be updated. And really also one of the key things is having that leadership and that culture of safety, that everyone from the top down, bottom up is really wraps their arms around safety and embraces it and realizes that, you don't want your employees to get injured. You don't want your coworkers to get injured. So really just embracing that at all levels of the organization. I think those are some of the key things to make sure that companies stay compliant and stay safe and healthy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Beatrice. Michael, time to get you involved here. Can you share of what has been in the news recently about some concerns of the validity of certain unions?
Yeah, certainly. So in California is one of the handful of states, along with New York and a few others, that require labor peace agreements for all cannabis licensees. These labor peace agreements basically allow the union, or a union, a particular union, to have access to employees, to attempt organizing efforts, and the benefit from management's perspective is that these people will not be engaging in pickets and strikes prior to being recognized as a union. Well, there have been some well-established unions that have started challenging the validity of some of the unions that have gained popularity with cannabis management in California. And one such union is the Professional Technical Union, Local 33, also called ProTech. So the Teamsters Union filed a complaint with the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board in March of this year, alleging that ProTech was not a genuine labor organization, which is required in order to have a valid labor peace agreement in California. After conducting an investigation in July, the Labor Relations Board agreed with Teamsters, finding that ProTech had made no tangible efforts to organize or represent cannabis industry employees and actually lacked a physical presence in California, allegedly. So at least 90 companies, cannabis licensees, including some of the largest in California, had signed a labor peace agreement with ProTech. And they had recently had to scramble to make agreements with other labor unions. They were provided 180 days to establish a new labor peace agreement with a bona fide labor organization by the California Department of Cannabis Control. And ProTech isn't the only labor organization to face this kind of scrutiny. Another union, the National Agricultural Workers Union, has also faced similar allegations of being a, for lack of a better phrase, sham union from organized, established unions. So I want to be clear that I don't particularly know the history of ProTech or the National Agricultural Workers Union, and I'm not saying these unions would not be acceptable unions in some circumstances in other states, depending on the circumstances, if a labor peace agreement is required. But it is important that management is aware that this issue is out there, that there are these unions who may not be qualified to have labor peace agreements that would be eligible under the law to be applicable to cannabis licensees. And it's likely that this will continue, that established unions will continue to challenge these newer labor organizations' rights to enter into these labor peace agreements.
Great. Next question, moving on to you again, Jason. In the cannabis industry, what are some of the challenges in implementing career pathing? I know I've heard that term pop up frequently. So, and how can organizations overcome some of those challenges?
First, you have to have a path, right? So what does that mean? So that means having the proper job descriptions, the proper org planning, meaning you understand what the organization looks like, who's maybe spans of control, layers from top all the way down. So first and foremost, got to have what I call clean org charts and clean path that people can see where they can essentially see themselves in the future based on training, which is the other piece. I think a lot of our clients that we work with haven't really developed yet a strong training and development for not only just the work that they do in cannabis, but even management training. A lot of folks in cannabis tend to be a little bit younger in age, therefore maybe their first management role. So training and development, not only of the subject matter by which you're working in, but also how to manage people and how to really deal with crucial conversations, how to really have a proper dialogue regarding performance, things like that. So it goes back to my 3 things of engagement, right? And then finally the compensation. So you have to have a right compensation philosophy that complements that org structure that I just mentioned. So first, how people overcome that is creating a strong structure first with job descriptions. So it's not about the person, it's about the role. And when you create job descriptions, it's not about putting Bill, Susie, or whatever here. It's about, I need a controller, I need FP&A, I need a lawyer. So things like that. It's really a substantive conversation that needs to be had. And we work with our clients all the time on that and making sure they have the proper goals that complement those roles to actually achieve success. And, secondary to that is really having succession planning from the top down as best you can. Because if you understand where people stand in their careers, are we developing people along that training and development side I just mentioned? So if you have all of that, then you can see that path. And then finally, you should have some kind of process, right? So what does a career development process look like? It doesn't have to be overly complicated. It can be like, I see you through training or through rotation, you could be in this level management role in the next 3 years. But you have to work with the employee, and the employee on the other way around needs to also be part and put their effort in too. It's not just a one-way street. That's where that dialogue comes along. An employee really have the effort and hunger, in my opinion, to be able to be very successful in managing their career. And by doing that simple, just working dialogue, I've seen people go from, entry level all the way to, C-suite in a very short period of time.
I'm hearing a lot of dialogue, communication, obviously many aspects of life. It's very important.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Could you share examples of successful incentive plans and benefits that have proven to be attractive to employees in the cannabis sector? Let's go to you, Beatrice.
Yeah, so there's lots of things that can be used. So there's not a one size fits all. And you really need to know what your company culture is to see what's going to work with your employee base. The other thing too is that you need to also continue to assess it as your company continues to evolve and grow. And sometimes that culture may change. A startup versus somebody that's been in the industry for a while, they may have different needs, especially if you have a workforce that has been with you for that whole time from startup to 5 years down the road, whatever the case may be. So you want to continue to assess that. But one of the things, to Jason's point, is having a competitive compensation package, being able to kind of, to the best of your abilities, benchmark what other industries are doing, or other cannabis industries are doing, both specifically in your area. Obviously, if you can get it, if you're in multiple states, getting that state information, but being competitive in your industry, whether that is a competitive base salary, if you are able to offer any type of performance bonuses, things along like that are attached to maybe like a sales goals, operational efficiency, anything like that you can add any little extra bit on. Kind of along those same lines, if you're able to do any type of profit sharing where you give back to the employees some of the profits, that gives buy-in and ownership for the employees as well. Looking at your benefit package, your medical, dental, the more you can offer medical, dental, vision, any of those types of things, that is really attractive to employees. Especially depending on the criteria, some of to Jason's point, if the younger employees, if they're, their first job, maybe first or second job, they may not care as much about benefits until they need them. So it's nice to be able to offer that for them. If they realize they need it, then when it comes time for open enrollment, they will hopefully sign up. If they don't sign up, that a lot of education and training. There's to Jason's point previously, developing that career path, but also providing training if you're able to invest in them going to a type of conference or a seminar, even if it's something online, anything to help invest in their education, but that also they can take that and then be a good resource back to the company. So it's beneficial for the company as well. Those are a handful of things. Jason, you probably have a few others that you can throw in there as well.
Did a great job. That's kind of the bulk of them. However, there are other things like, Beatrice mentioned, those incentive programs for, a lot of retail organizations. We've helped put small bonus programs, typically based off revenue. It doesn't have to be, sales forecasting. It doesn't have to actually be very complicated. Recognition, right? This is the generation of people, what we call social revolution. It's the generation that it was more about experience. So recognition being an experience, right? And recognizing hard work, recognizing achievements of a goal, but just simple recognition. Again, it doesn't have to be expensive. It could be buying them lunch. It could be, we're going to give you a half day off. I mean, in some cases, yeah, it will cost you, but it doesn't have to be that much. Or putting in programs. There are groups out there that you can work with that will have experiential programs you can do where you can give incentives to your employees. Tickets at Work, I believe, is one that's free to the organization, and it's a way for people to go online, get concert tickets, get movie tickets, get all these discounts. It doesn't cost the company anything. So, but you're giving them choice, right? So by giving, really allows that incentive, and it's not paternalistic, right? Because growing up in the other olden days, it used to be we would tell you what you get. Now it's we ask. We tend to tailor the the needs based on what's valued, which is always what you should do.
Right, and it's important too to know how employees want to be recognized. Sometimes it's a simple thank you and appreciation, but only if some people like to be publicly recognized. Some people thrive on being recognized in front of their peers. Other people, like, that's the worst thing you can do for them. So knowing your employees well enough to know, do they want to be recognized publicly, or is it just a thank you card? Just knowing that and then appropriately recognizing the employees will go a long way.
Yep, exactly. One last thing, I'll leave it with you.
Yeah.
I used to do this all the time. I put my employees' birthdays on my calendar, and I would send them a simple email in the morning. Hey, I hope you have a great day of celebration with your family. Happy birthday. That simple. And you'd be surprised. Wow, you're so thoughtful. Thank you so much. It goes such a long way. And guess what? It's free. So
people love the attaboys and attagirls, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now on to pay transparency. It's become an important, very important in today's workforce. How can cannabis companies ensure transparency in their pay practices while maintaining competitiveness? Do you want to jump on them?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things is just being very clear in your compensation policies and structure, as transparent as you can be with sharing what, whether it's, how pay decisions are made, like what's the philosophy on, is it based on experience, performance, the market rate, clearly defining those job roles and responsibilities, as Jason mentioned earlier, having job descriptions in place, you're basing it off of those types of things. And whatever criteria it is that you're using to develop those salaries, and staying consistent with those, that you're not hiring someone, that has 2 years of experience that is making, 3 times as much as someone that has 10 years of experience. So just really being consistent with that. And then benchmarking, making sure that you're staying in tune with what it is that is the market rate, because some people get complacent and they haven't adjusted their pay salaries in 10 years. Well, that's going to be a problem, because then you're not going to be competitive and you're not going to attract that top talent if you're paying well below what the market rate is for that. Also consider looking at merit-based increases. So making sure that increases are tied to the performance. It's not just across the board. You can have cost of living adjustments, which is great, but you should also have merit increases to reward those employees that are doing their job and are going above and beyond and getting recognized for that. You also want to be very transparent during the job, when you're recruiting. And Jason, I know, can speak to this as well. You want to let people know, people nowadays are not going to be afraid to, at the very beginning, say, what is a salary range for this role? Because you're not going to go through the whole interview process and then realize that you're $10,000 apart in what you need to make versus what they're offering. So being as transparent, and there are some states where pay transparency is required, but not all states require that. So even if you're in states that don't require that, consider putting that in, because that way that saves you a lot of headache of having to weed out those people that are not in line with what you're able to pay. You also want to be transparent in promotions and any type of job advancements, making sure that employees know, again, to the career progression, what they know, what steps they need to take to be able to be considered for a future promotion or any type of advancement. Making sure employees have access to their own pay information, that they have a secure place to log into to review their pay stubs, bonuses, whatever it may be. So access to that. And then just, again, communication. I think that you'll see that, again, that's the reoccurring theme. Are we communicating? Are we training our employees about what our pay practices are? And then obviously staying compliant with whatever, the requirements are for pay, whether it's making sure that if there's a change in the minimum wage for a state, that we're making sure that we're staying compliant with things of that nature.
Sounds good. So best to be transparent because the data is out there, and we're employing a generation that knows how to get it. So might as well share the information. So hearing a lot about it, sounds like a roadmap to fairness is what we're trying to get to. Next question for you, Michael. What are some effective strategies for managing and resolving labor disputes in the cannabis sector while maintaining a positive employer reputation?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I think like virtually all, solving virtually all problems, ounce of prevention is more valuable than a pound of cure, so to speak. So being able to proactively resolve labor disputes before they happen, or before they become overblown, before they become litigation, before they become government charge, before they become arbitration with the union. These are all very important skills for management to have. And I think it comes down to 5 basic steps. One is having clear policies, and I'll go into a little bit more what I mean by each of these. A culture of open communication, proactive resolution of potential disputes, flexibility in problem solving, and seeking guidance from your team of professionals. And so going to the clear and fair policies, I think having policies in place that cover a minimum of hiring and firing policies, pay and benefits, discrimination and harassment, workplace safety, and dispute resolution, particularly if there is a union involved. And that will be spelled out in the collective bargaining agreement, but making sure that that is a very clear policy. These are very important to give the employee really a lay of the land of what to expect. And that can be really helpful in resolving disputes. Having a culture of open communication is important for managing labor disputes at the earliest stage. Ideally, management should foster an environment where employees feel comfortable coming to their managers to express concerns that they have, and management should also strive to be responsive to employee concerns by resolving issues that employees bring up in a timely manner. Being proactive in addressing potential disputes is important to discuss verbally issues that employees have, but also it's very vital to document those communications with employees. It's really, documentation is really the key to, I think, best practices in management. Union and even non-union workforces, you do not want to be in a position where you're having to after the fact, after a dispute has arisen, go back and make a record of verbal interactions that occurred, because that is going to be argued as non-reliable or pretextual later on if it ever gets challenged. So it's very important to contemporaneously document, even if you're talking to an employee for a verbal warning and you don't want to scare them by giving them a writing, you can still document the verbal warning and put it in their employee file that you spoke to them and they received a counseling on the day for this issue. Being willing to compromise is also very important. It may be it may be necessary to compromise in a labor dispute. And it's important to remember that compromising is not a sign of weakness in every situation. It can be a sign that you're committed to resolving a dispute and moving forward with an employee. And finally, seeking professional guidance is really important. There are a lot of considerations when you're dealing with employee and labor issues that you're not going to see the full picture until you really talk to an HR professional or an employment attorney or labor attorney, because they will be able to use their experience to kind of see where this issue could end up going, what your worst case scenario is, and what your alternatives are: doing nothing, taking action, or alternatives like that. So by following these strategies, I think cannabis employees can effectively manage and resolve labor disputes while maintaining a positive reputation.
Fantastic. All right. Now, a question for you, Jason and Beatrice. How can companies in the cannabis industry promote a fair environment and address issues of pay equity and inclusivity? I know we've kind of touched on some of that, but if you could address that question.
Jason, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah.
Either way, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I guess I will. Beatrice really said it best. It's doing the market analysis, right? Both, not just external, internal. So when you run an internal equity, what we used to do and how we help clients out is understanding where the gaps are. And obviously there isn't enough money to fix everybody. However, if you have a targeted approach and strategic approach, you may be able to fix retail this year, adjust them so that they're all in alignment. Because as pay becomes more openly available, it's always open. Everyone talks, for at least in my experience. So that's why I try not to keep it a secret. But at the same time, it's those market studies that are so important, and finding a professional group like Flower Hire that has cannabis data, not just external data, that can give you guidance on that. So, Beatrice.
Yep. No, that's great. That's absolutely internal and external pay equity is great, because again, to your point, employees will discuss things, and if they feel that they're not being treated properly, especially if they have similar backgrounds and experiences and years of experience, and there's a big difference, you're just going to have, an uprising, and you don't want that. Another thing that is really important is really to foster an inclusive work culture where all the employees feel valued and heard, and giving them those opportunities, whether, if you can have some type of an anonymous reporting system, a confidential channel where employees can feel, feel free to express their concerns without fear of retribution. I mean, there shouldn't be retribution or retaliation anyways, but sometimes employees will feel more comfortable saying, reporting something anonymously. So if there is a way that they can report any concerns anonymously, that's really good too. Another thing is, and I'm sure Jason can attest to this, when you're putting job postings and job descriptions, you have an equal opportunity statement. States that you have equal opportunity and anti-discrimination statements in your job postings, in your employee handbooks, your policies, just to reinforce the fairness piece of that. And then another thing you can consider is there are what's called employee resource groups, or ERGs. You can encourage some of those in your organizations that can be supporting, diverse backgrounds. But just be mindful when you're setting up ERGs, you can't exclude someone just because they maybe don't fall into that group. If they, excuse me, if they want to learn more about whatever that employee resource group is, they have just as much opportunity to attend those meetings or information sessions as other employees that may fall into that category. So just be mindful when you're setting those up to not be exclusive while you're trying to be inclusive.
Yeah. And finally, just real quick, I would just say, as you have your open communications, those town halls, have a form where people can submit questions anonymously or something of that nature. And a lot of times the pay equity will come up, and it gives management an opportunity to really say, oh, wow, I had no idea. Because they're not really thinking about that all the time. And, to be fair, they're working on growing the business, sustaining the business. So it's up to HR professionals. If they cannot do that, or management, then the employees should really have an avenue, kind of what Beatrice said, like an anonymous way to be able to bring these topics up.
Gotcha. All right, Jason. So let's say the labor union is actually knocking on the door of your organization. What steps can companies take to proactively engage with unions and foster a constructive relationship?
Yeah, I'm pro incentive, so I'm not anti-union. I'm not for union. I'm pro incentive. So if the company isn't providing the right incentives, like I talked about, those engagement areas, it's okay. Bring in the union to have a conversation. There's nothing wrong with that. I know a lot of people are scared by that. I don't know why, but find means to actually reach out in some cases if you need to. Have the conversation, understand what they're hearing. And, hopefully you have your own set of data points where you can, actually have a fruitful conversation, not just about we demand this or we want this on either side. So, and having clear job descriptions is always really important. That's where a lot of employees feel overworked, because they know what they signed up for, and unions will come in and help protect them from those very things where employers sometimes overuse employees, especially in cannabis. We tend to do multiple jobs. If you've ever worked a cannabis role, either as a management or leader, you tend to rule or have over multiple places for sure. So with that being said, I would just suggest that, look, be open to communication and make sure it's fact and example based. It cannot be opinion. It cannot be, anything else other than an objective way to look at the situation. So that way you can truly have an honest and candid conversation.
Here's that conversation, communication again.
That's simple.
Obviously,
sometimes easier said than done.
Yeah, true. Yeah, sometimes people are terrible communicators. Get them a coach.
So with ongoing growth of the cannabis industry, how can companies attract or retain top talent and remain competitive in the marketplace? Beatrice, you want to?
Sure. Jason and I both talked a lot about some things already as far as competitive compensation and benefits and career development opportunities. Another thing that the companies can look at is that overused phrase of work-life balance. And sometimes it's not necessarily a balance, but it's just what makes sense. Sometimes work is going to take the precedent. Sometimes life is going to take precedence, and understanding that your employees have both, and being mindful of what the needs are. But if there's any type of opportunity to have any type of flexible work arrangements, whether that is remote work options. I know that's not for every role, but there are some roles that still can be done remote, or a hybrid type role, compressed work weeks, anything to kind of accommodate the employee's needs and help promote that sort of somewhat sense of balance. Encourage your employees to use, if you offer paid time off, vacation days, encourage them to use that. Everybody gets burned out. You could love your job, but you still need to get away and just decompress for a little bit. So encouraging the employees to use the time off that they have available. Regularly engaging with your employees. Jason had mentioned earlier about employee engagement surveys. Have focus groups. Any way that you can get feedback to improve the work environment, to get that involvement from your employees, and involve them in decision making. If you do focus groups or employee engagement surveys, make sure that you're sharing the information back with your employees, good or bad, because the worst thing you can do is ask for feedback and then don't do anything with it. So making sure that you're giving them, at least on a high level, giving the employees feedback of, here's the survey, here's what we did, here's the results, here's the things that we want to enact, here's the things we can't do right now for whatever reason. Just being, again, transparent with your employees and making them aware of that. Making sure you can streamline your recruiting process. I know Jason can attest to that, as well as you don't want it to be so short that it doesn't seem like it's valid or legitimate, but you also don't want it to drag on for 3 months. You hear horror stories of somebody having to go through 8 rounds of interviews, and 3 months later, you've lost your good employees if you're taking that long. So have it be a good candidate experience. And then just communicate. Again, there's that communication word again. Communicate to the potential hires, back and forth. It's a positive experience for both the company and for the employees or the candidates.
All right, I think that's some good information there. Given the fact that the industry is still relatively new, and the way it's structured state by state, it's comprised of mostly small and medium-sized companies, at least based upon what I've seen. And obviously small and medium-sized companies have limited resources. So for these medium-sized and small businesses, how can they implement meaningful employee engagement practices and navigate labor union challenges effectively? Jason, you want to address that one?
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, there's a lot of free ways to do this. And I say the word free a lot because it really is free. And then one of the ways is just go to SurveyMonkey and do a survey, do a pulse survey. You don't do a full engagement survey. Pick about maybe 6 to 10 questions and really focus on the areas that you're very interested in, whether it's compensation, whether it's development, or anything of growth, or training and development of that range as well. Or I used to do any CEO I reported with or worked with, I would say do these little fireside chats or breakfasts, where they get random folks from different departments together in a small setting, and the leader the CEO can really have an open and honest dialogue. It's going to be really weird at first and crickets probably, but as you start to do that, that allows those employees to go back into the workforce and really tell it how it is. And hey, I met with the CEO. Hey, we talked about this. Hey, they listened to me. Wow, this was interesting. We did cover this. We told them this. So it really is. These are all free ways to do it. It's just, I sometimes we forget when we get to in the working world that we can't communicate anymore, like individually. And I think in today's day and age with social media, I think that also puts a little bit of a challenge. So it's really more of the effort, I believe, into the leadership team, and just schedule some time on your calendar. Everyone says everyone's busy. I get it, but put it once a quarter. Let's start with that. Put it like half day. I'm going to go around. I'm going to go to this facility. I'm going to go to this facility. Make a point to do it, and people will notice and become net promoters.
Yep. And I think I agree to that same point, is having management, MB management by walking around. Yep. Just getting out, letting your employees see you, maybe even depending on the roles, stepping into their shoes, working side by side with them if you can. That will go a long way to be like, hey, they understand what my job entails. They understand the challenges of my role. And if they don't, they will now have a better understanding of it. Getting employee committees, having employees, whether it's a social committee or a fun committee or whatever you want to call it, or a wellness, maybe they have a wellness initiative. They come up with ways to have wellness programs or incentives or any type of community engagement, whether it's everybody deciding to go out and volunteer for an event, whatever it is that will help promote a sense of ownership, but also just that team building and that sense of culture and community, and embracing that.
Great. Next question is for you, Michael. What legal and regulatory considerations should cannabis companies be aware of when it comes to employee engagement and labor union interactions?
Yeah, so this is somewhat of a complicated question, but I will kind of give some general guidance. And you would really need, this is going to really depend on a lot of factors. One, what stage are you at with unions? Are you just at the labor peace agreement stage versus has a union already been recognized? Prior to union being recognized, it's important to remember that a labor peace agreement is going to limit what you can and cannot say about a union. For example, in California, pursuant to the Business and Professions Code, at a minimum, all labor peace agreements are required to have management agree not to disrupt efforts of the union, and agree to allow the union to communicate with its employees and to attempt to organize and represent employees. Some labor peace agreements take that significant step further and require management to agree not to disparage the union in any way. And it's important to review the specific language of these labor peace agreements, because a broadly worded non-disparagement agreement in a LPA might prevent management from correcting misrepresentations made by unions. And sometimes that does happen, or allegations that the union is making about an employer. Now, an employer also is bound by restrictions under the National Labor Relations Act. An employer cannot union bust. And I use that's an informal phrase, and that can mean a lot of things. But an employer is not allowed to, for example, tell their employees that if they unionize, then the business is going to shut down. That's too far. The employer can say certain other things, but what they can say is defined. It's kind of strictly defined, and the context where that happens is also very important to remember. Captive audience meetings are a very powerful tool that a management has in order to educate their employees about unions and the effect that a union will have on the workplace. And so it's important to specifically review these agreements. If there is a labor peace agreement, review the laws of the state that you're in, the jurisdiction that you're in, for what you can and cannot say. And as always, definitely this is one area where you really are going to want to consult with a labor attorney.
Great. And, probably a good segue here to actually a question from one of our participants. And maybe you can take this one, Michael, but this one is, how does the CSA Schedule 1 of cannabis affect the validity of collective bargaining agreements and a litigation issue? If you could address that one.
Yeah, so that's a good question, because and this is a developing area of law, and I think that this is going to be subject to further developments with several circuit courts in the federal level. But as of today, employers are still required, cannabis employers are still required to comply with the National Labor Relations Act. There are potentially some arguments that the National Labor Relations Board itself does not have jurisdiction over cannabis issues because of the fact that it's a Scheduled 1 narcotic still. But that is quickly changing, quickly developing, and so I would not rely on that as a indication of whether the National Labor Relations Board can have jurisdiction over a labor dispute. That is going to be I think that the safest course of action will be to still continue to take the position that we can assume the National Labor Relations Act is going to apply to all cannabis employers, and even if it does not, the states where this is legal, where cannabis is legal, all have labor laws and labor adjudicatory bodies that will have jurisdiction over these issues.
Thank you. I know if you go to Google, it says it doesn't apply, but that's not necessarily the case, right?
Exactly.
Safest is probably reach out to a professional to help you get an answer to that.
Yes.
Okay. We'll move on to Jason for this question. What are some potential challenges that cannabis companies might face when dealing with labor unions, and how can they navigate these situations effectively?
That's a really great question. It kind of goes to what Michael's saying. It can be depending upon where you are at through the process of labor unions. However, I'll speak at it from a higher level, just because this tends to be the number one problem I see. Have your data ready. As an organization, have your financials ready that you can, when you go into negotiations, you can talk about them effectively about the organization and business. Having data on your employee populations, having data on everything you can, so that way you can effectively have an objective conversation with any labor union. And it sometimes is perceived as contentious, but those that have done this a couple of times, really what it is a conversation about something's not right, whether it's health and safety, compensation is so out of whack, or you have basically disadvantages of employees being used outside their job description. Anything you can have as a documentation point is super helpful for companies. HR, as one might think, actually houses more data than any other department in the company. Yeah. I know finance likes to debate this with me all the time, but it's true. Think about it. I mean, we have not only your information, but if you have benefits, we have your spouse, we've got your dependents, we've got all this other information. So it's there. It's just having the ability to pull the information into ways that are effective, that you can use them in a conversation with labor unions, because they're going to do the same thing. They have what they know, and they're going to come in trying to challenge some things. And if you have the data to either substantiate or refute it, it just allows an organization. And that's what I see is always a problem. It's just scattered everywhere. It's not in a first file. It's not. You have to really be organized and internally as an organization, because otherwise, how can you talk about your culture anyways if you don't know how many people you have in your organization or what their demographics are and how that relates to your compensation philosophy? So my number one thing I would tell any company in this is have an organized piece of data sets of all your people information, and including even financial information. Again, that's something we've been helping our organizations out with by helping them get all this together, so that way it's easy, accessible, and ready to use.
Fantastic. All right, Michael, what are the key differences and considerations for cannabis companies operating in right-to-work states? I know that's a phrase that we hear a lot in the media, right to work. So what are the key differences and considerations for cannabis companies operating in these right-to-work states regarding labor unions and employee relations?
Yeah, so I'll just briefly go over right to work, what that refers to for people who may not be familiar with it. So right to work state is a state that has enacted legislation that guarantees no individual can be forced as a condition of employment to join or pay dues to a labor union, that it's a purely elected issue. That is contrary to how it had traditionally been used, and many states that is not how it works. If you have an employer that has recognized a union in a lot of states, not all of them. There are 27 states that have right to work laws, but in the other states, you can be, as an employee will be required to contribute if they are under the collective bargaining agreement to the union. And so none of the right to work states currently require cannabis, where it is legal, currently require cannabis companies to enter into labor peace agreements. So generally speaking, unions are going to be less likely to be a serious concern for management in right to work states, because without the mandate of union membership, it's less likely that a union will be able to effectively organize. That's just the economic reality of the situation. However, taking an aggressive stance against unions in these states can potentially have unintended consequences, although most employers would probably agree that mandated labor peace agreements can be a headache. These agreements do have the benefit of preventing a union from engaging in strikes or boycotts against an employer while the union is in the process of organizing. And in right to work states, that may not be the case. So right to work state, the bottom line is, if you're in a right to work state, a union is going to be less significant of an issue for you to focus on.
Thank you. Now we got about 7 minutes, and we have a handful of more questions and 2 more from the participants. So let's see if we can get to them. This is for Jason and Beatrice. What role does effective communication play in managing labor relations and addressing potential unionization in the cannabis industry? I know we've talked about communication a lot, so maybe I don't know if there's anything to add to this, but if there is anything, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is you want to just build trust. Overall, you want to just build trust, prevent misunderstandings, and foster a really positive work environment by keeping those lines of communications open. And, Jason said earlier, it's a two-way communication. It's not just encouraging employees to express their concerns, but then listening to those and providing feedback and really setting clear expectations. I think a lot of misunderstandings happen when expectations aren't clearly stated, whether it's through a job description or a task or specific directions. If everything is clear and everybody understands their role, then there's less chance for misunderstandings, and everybody, does the jobs that they're supposed to do. And really just educating the employees, when you're talking about potential unionization, just educating about the pros and the cons. Again, not necessarily taking a stance, but just educating them the pros and cons of unionization and what their legal rights are, what they legally can and can't do, are a couple of things from a communication standpoint. And Jason, I'm sure you've got other things to add.
Honestly, I mean, I've talked ad nauseum about communication, and you did a great job summing that up. So maybe I'd rather just get to the Q&A just to give us, since we only have like 5 minutes left. Does that work for everybody?
Sounds great.
Good. Absolutely. So we have 3 questions from the participants. So whoever wants to take this one. Medical cannabis belongs in healthcare, and we now see the conversations happening around rescheduling of cannabis from 1 to 3. How will medical cannabis be implemented in healthcare with unions? Anybody want to jump on that one?
I mean, I'm trying to think, is this question asking about if you have a medical card and you're in a union and they do drug testing? Is that where that's going? Because there's not really going to be a change between Schedule 3 or Schedule 1, in my opinion, because there's lots of other medications that can, make you impaired. So what I always tell folks, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, or cannabis or any other prescription, if you're impaired, you really shouldn't be working.
Right.
I believe that's maybe what they're asking. I could be wrong, but maybe Michael or Beatrice on something else.
No, I took that same thing. So yeah, I agree. It's impairment is impairment.
Yep.
Because even, alcohol is a legal substance, but if you come to work drunk, you're going to have consequences.
Right.
And I believe a lot of folks are getting rid of marijuana as a drug test, including, big company like Amazon doesn't test for it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to find good employees, typically, right?
Yep.
Okay, next, what are the labor market conditions for HR professionals targeting local or independent cannabis companies? If you know, specifically for generous level positions in Southern California.
I believe there's a lot out there. I think you just need to go out and take a look, or, Flower Hire has them always posted at times. At maybe some of the generalists, we tend to post a little bit above, but it's available. There's plenty available, and people are getting in all the time.
Anything else to add, anyone? Okay, on to the what I think is the last for the Q&A. How can a startup initiate a mandated labor peace agreement, and by reaching out to local unions? That's
yeah, I can address that. So there are dozens and dozens of unions in every state. I'm not sure which state this person is but there are many that will be happy to speak to you. And I think that the important thing when getting to the labor peace agreement stage is this is not a take it or leave it agreement. It can be with some of the bigger players. They will present you with terms, and they will say you can accept the terms or not. That may be the case. That is potentially not a good decision for them, because there are, like I said, several other players who are willing to change the terms of the agreement. And so that is, I think, a very important piece of the puzzle to get an attorney involved in, because there are, as I alluded to before, terms that some unions can put into these labor peace agreements that make it really, really difficult for an employer to take any action in response to misrepresentations made by the union. And there are certainly, there's no law. The National Labor Relations Act exists. It promotes the right to unionize, but there's no law that says that you cannot correct misrepresentations. And there is case law that has held that a union can be liable for damages caused by making false misrepresentations about an employer. So for that reason, I think it's really important to talk to an attorney to get them to review the specific terms that a union is going to be offering with a labor peace agreement.
Fantastic. All right, I think we're about out of time here, but we're on to final thoughts. So if we want to go around and anybody wants to add a cherry on top of the sundae, what I think has been a really informative webinar, please do. Let's start with you, Beatrice. Anything you'd like to add?
I think probably I can speak for everybody. The word that kept coming up is just communication. I think being transparent and being open and communicating with your employees, setting expectations, and just being a good employer. Listening to your employees, what their needs are, and just making sure that it's a good balance. It's, you're looking at what the employees needs, what the employer needs, and coming to some sort of good compromise, and just having a good workforce, good place the employees want to come, and have a good culture for employees to come to work.
Ditto. And I would just say, have your data ready, right?
Yeah.
Just have your data accessible where you can compile it and be able to have a very constructive, objective conversation.
Yeah, and I think the point that I would like to leave you with is the importance of documenting policies and having a practice of documenting employee interactions. I think that is something that you don't see enough of, and unfortunately, it is what it is, but that's the best practice I'll leave you with.
Well, great. I think I learned a lot today. I appreciate our panelists. I appreciate everybody who participated in this webinar. I believe if anybody else has questions after this, please feel free. You can find us, get us an email, and we'll try to get a response back to you. So with that being said, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.